An elderly woman had simply been out for a stroll when her entire body erupted in an unbearable itch. Seconds later, she was coughing up blood and collapsing on the ground. The cause, a mysterious virus that had descended on Earth. All it took was breathing one breath, and the itching began. To avoid infection, a person would have to stop breathing entirely. With that in mind, Stanley held his breath and went to sleep. He was jolted awake by urgent knocking at the door. Still groggy, he answered it to find his father, old Stanley, standing outside. His mother had come down with something, and his father needed to take her to the hospital, which meant Stanley would have to drop his daughter Sophia off at school himself. Stanley didn't think much of it. Probably just a common cold. He got ready quickly and drove Sophia to school. At the entrance, he reminded her to be good. Sophia said nothing. She opened the car door without a word and got out. Sophia had witnessed her mother's death. The trauma had been severe enough to leave her with serious autism. She hadn't spoken since. Stanley watched his silent daughter disappear through the school gates, then drove to the city center. His father owned a department store there, and Stanley worked the floor every day. Mornings were especially hectic. Deliveries had to be unloaded, moved to the stockroom, and logged into the system. It was his family's business, but his father paid him a modest $30,000 a month, with 2 days off a week and 2 months of annual leave. Enough to get by, barely. He hadn't even made it to the front door before a co-worker named Dex cornered him. Dex had been caught stealing from the store. Old Stanley had found out and, by the rules, should have called the police, but out of consideration for appearances, he'd simply fired him instead. Now Dex wanted the wages he was owed for his last month of work. He didn't dare go to the father, so he went to Stanley. Stanley pointed out that he had nothing to do with payroll, that was his father's domain. The two argued in the street and parted on bad terms. The delivery truck arrived shortly after. Stanley opened the basement access and began taking stock of the incoming inventory. He was halfway through when a strange old woman wandered into the store and the scene from the opening unfolded. Stanley called the police immediately. The detective who answered looked exhausted before Stanley had even finished his description. Speaking wearily, the detective told him what was going on. Similar cases had been cropping up all over the city. One person started itching after a bath. Another reacted after drinking a glass of juice. Doctors had examined the patients and found nothing. The old woman was the first to die. The detective suspected a pre-existing heart condition or some underlying illness. Stanley didn't push it. But as the officers were leaving with the body, he noticed a homeless man near the entrance scratching at himself. Something about it unsettled him. He had too much work to sit with the feeling, though. He cleaned up the bloodstain by the door and got back to inventory. Then the school called. Sophia had bitten a classmate. She wasn't doing well, and they asked Stanley to come collect her. He assumed she had been bullied, but no matter how gently he asked, she wouldn't speak. She pressed her hands over her ears and stared at nothing. He stopped pushing. He brought her to the store and let her stay while he finished what he needed to do. By the time they arrived, emergency announcements were being broadcast across the city. Shops along the street were pulling down their shutters one by one. The sidewalks were emptying. Stanley had a bad feeling but kept the store open anyway. By evening, the broadcasts had kept customers away all day. Just as he was getting ready to close, his friend Henry showed up looking for a blender. While Stanley went to find one, the woman at the register, Lily, suddenly cried out. Stanley reacted fast. He told Sophia to hide in the corner and stay there no matter what, then came around to find two robbers, a man and a woman. Under the woman's direction, Lily handed over all the cash from the register. That wasn't enough. The woman demanded Stanley open the store safe. He was marched to the back office. He genuinely didn't know the combination. The safe wasn't his to open. The male robber didn't believe him and moved to grab him. In the scuffle, Stanley yanked off his mask. He'd recognized them both the moment they walked in. It was Dex and his niece, a young woman he called Dark Girl. Stanley told Dex to take what was on the counter and walk away. The cash was more than enough to cover his wages. Pushing this further would be bad for everyone. He didn't get to finish. A gunshot rang out from the corridor. Dark Girl had spotted Sophia hiding in the aisle. The child bit her. In the chaos, the gun went off and the bullet hit Lily. Stanley grabbed bandages and did what he could to stabilize her. Just as he reached for his phone to call an ambulance, sirens wailed outside. Henry had quietly slipped away and called the police. The sight of officers at the front sent both Dex and Dark Girl toward the back exit. But before they could reach it, something screamed from outside. Everyone froze, staring at the security monitors. Stanley's first thought was that the officers had run into a gang. Then Henry called them all over and pulled up an emergency broadcast. Scientists had identified the itch as a virus. Once infected, a person would begin scratching uncontrollably, then start hemorrhaging, then transform into a blood-crazed creature that attacked anyone nearby. The virus spread through saliva and direct contact and was sweeping the globe at terrifying speed. All citizens were ordered to remain indoors. Dark Girl refused to believe it. She insisted it was a police trick, a lie cooked up to lure them outside. Stanley used the distraction to disarm her. With Henry's help, Dex and Dark Girl were tied up. Stanley tried to call the authorities, but a fresh emergency announcement had already been issued. The outbreak was getting worse. A sound from the stockroom interrupted them. Stanley went down to investigate and found two people inside, a man and a woman. The woman was in a frenzy and had attacked the man. Looking up, Stanley saw the street-level access hatch hanging open. They must have fallen through. He dealt with the woman swiftly and secured the hatch. He was halfway back upstairs when the stockroom went quiet, then loud again. He traced the noise to a small side room and found Sophia. She had somehow wandered down there. Fortunately, the two below hadn't noticed her. As he turned to leave, he didn't see it. The woman he'd killed had twitched. Upstairs, the police line was completely jammed. He tried his father's number, No answer. Dex, for all his faults, wasn't a bad person. Stanley untied both of them. Meanwhile, Lily's condition was deteriorating. She needed surgery. With the city in chaos, no ambulance was coming. Then more gunfire from outside. The military had moved in. Anyone on the street would be shot. They were stuck. His father finally called back. Things at the hospital had gone badly. When the outbreak hit, old Stanley had been there with his wife. He'd been clawed by an infected patient trying to protect her, just a surface wound, but enough. He'd been quarantined. The call made Stanley think of Sophia again. She had bitten a classmate that morning. Could she be infected? He went to the rest area and found her asleep and scratching. He watched, his heart in his throat. Then, at the last moment, her hand stilled. She seemed fine, but the unease didn't leave him. A crash against the shutter pulled him back downstairs. Through the security feed, he saw something on the monitors that stopped him cold. He understood then, bullets weren't stopping the infected. He woke everyone up. As they gathered, one of the infected from outside, already shot, was getting back to its feet. Stanley thought of the stockroom. If the ones outside could revive, the ones below could too. The hatch was locked, that helped. But the supplies down there were critical if the lockdown stretched into weeks. He decided to clear it out. He needed a second person. Henry begged off. He was willing to help from above, but not to go down. Stanley didn't argue. He sent Henry upstairs to watch over the others and took Dex instead. Dex wrapped up every exposed patch of skin he could find. They went down carefully. Just as Stanley had guessed, the woman had come back. She seemed to sense the danger in the room and didn't attack. She bolted for the exit instead. By the time Stanley reacted, she was gone. Dark Girl, watching from above, managed to block the door and stop her from getting out, but took a hard blow to the stomach in the process. Stanley confirmed Dark Girl hadn't been scratched. Then he gathered cleaning agents and sulfuric acid from the stockroom, mixed them into a crude dissolving solution, and submerged both bodies. Whatever the virus could do, it couldn't reassemble them from that. Then Henry came downstairs with news. Lily hadn't made it. Too much blood loss. They found a white sheet to cover her and planned to move the body to the stockroom until the military restored order. Then they looked down at the spreading bloodstain on the floor. Lily had risen. There was nothing else they could do. They added her to the vat. Stanley couldn't work out how she'd been infected. She'd shown no signs before. The only explanation he could piece together was that she'd already been carrying the virus when she came in that morning, just asymptomatic. Neither Stanley nor Dex noticed Henry slip away to the bathroom. He was scrubbing furiously at his arm. Lily had scratched him. By the time they finished with the body, it was past midnight. The shooting outside had stopped. Henry wanted to go home but was afraid of being mistaken for an infected and shot. Stanley tried the official emergency line. A recorded message played. No one answered. They were all hungry. The store had no shortage of food, at least. Stanley broke out some alcohol to take the edge off. For a while, sitting there eating and drinking, the tension loosened slightly. Then Sophia screamed from upstairs. Stanley ran up immediately. Sophia was unharmed, but Dark Girl had fainted. She had leukemia and took daily medication. This was why Dex had risked everything. He was trying to pay for her treatment. They brought the medication but left it in their car in the parking lot. Dex said he'd go get it himself. Stanley tried to talk him out of it. But without the medication, Dark Girl would deteriorate quickly. He handed back the gun. The moment Dex was gone, Stanley noticed something wrong with Henry. He was scratching and walking toward the bathroom. Stanley followed quietly. Around the corner, he found Henry clawing at himself, his arms bloody. The infection was unmistakable. Stanley moved to lock the door. He wasn't fast enough. Henry lunged. Despite his timid personality, Henry was strong. He had Stanley pinned. Just as Stanley felt the grip tightening around his throat, Henry went limp. Sophia was standing in the doorway, holding a hammer. Stanley stared at his daughter, then remembered where he was. He dragged Henry to the bathroom, finished it, and put him in the vat. Then, washing off the blood, he noticed something that turned his stomach, scratch marks on his own neck. From the struggle with Henry, he had been scratched. He was still processing this when Dex started shouting from the entrance. Stanley opened the shutter but not the inner door. Dex looked at him and understood what it meant. He didn't argue. He asked only that Stanley pass Dark Girl's medication to her, and said that if he showed any symptoms himself, he'd leave on his own. Stanley went upstairs with the medication and found a scratch on Dark Girl's shoulder, from when she had blocked the door earlier. He looked at the entrance monitor. Dex had the same marks. Dex was infected too. Stanley stood there for a moment. Then he went back upstairs and smothered Dark Girl with a pillow. He came back down and met Dex at the door. Dex looked at him and knew. He didn't deny it. He only asked to see Dark Girl one last time, and promised he would leave after. Stanley let him up. When Dex saw that she was already gone, he went still. Stanley reached for the gun. The chamber was empty, no rounds left. Dex grabbed him by the throat. Stanley was beyond exhausted. He went limp quickly. Dex took the last bullet from his pocket and walked to Sophia's room. He wanted Stanley to know what it felt like to lose someone. He had one hand on the door when he heard something in the hallway. He turned and found Dark Girl standing there, transformed. It hit him all at once. Stanley hadn't lied to him. Something moved behind him. Stanley was on his feet. He'd been playing dead. He put Dex down. He picked up the gun and handled both bodies methodically. methodically. Then, mid-task, the itch started. He'd known it was coming. To make sure he couldn't hurt Sophia when he lost himself, he went to the bathroom alone, sealed every exit with screws, and waited. The symptoms progressed quickly. At the end, Stanley made his choice. The next morning, Sophia woke up and went looking for her father. The store was empty and still. At the front counter, she found a note he had left her. A narrow beam of morning light pressed through a gap in the shutters. Outside, the city was silent. No survivors. No movement. No sound at all. The virus was just getting started.